right now it is 10:01. We have started recording, and we are going to throw it on over to our colleagues from the Office of Instructional Supports. And Charlene, I'll give it to you and your team to take away. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning, everyone. My name is Charlene Gleaton, and I am, as Jessica said, here in the Office of Early Learning and, oh, I need to change that. We've changed our name. We were Office of Early Learning and Literacy, and now we're Office of Instructional Supports. And I'm the team lead for a multi-tiered system of supports. And my colleague Abeline Hanna is here with me today, and she is our specialist for MTSS here also in the Office of Instructional Supports. So today I'm going to talk to you about MTSS and how it is going to be applicable in the work that you are doing. So first, we're going to talk about what MTSS is and why we need MTSS here in South Carolina, and then why you as EPPs should understand MTSS. And then we're going to jump into exactly where we can find it in the competencies and go through each of those components in depth to understand there are 6 components of MTSS. So we'll do an overview of those 6 components. Okay, so first, what is MTSS? Why do we need it in South Carolina in our schools? And why is it important for you to understand it, other than it's just in the competencies? But why do you need to understand MTSS for the work that we do in our schools? So MTSS provides a framework for how schools can provide a strong core instruction and support every student in South Carolina, because we know our students come to us in very different places and with different needs. So MTSS is to address the needs of all students. And this is accomplished by making sure we have very strong instructional practices and an evidence-based instructional model in our schools, and also very strong instructional materials. And we need to also make sure that data is what is guiding what we do in our classrooms. And I will give Jessica a copy of this PowerPoint that she can share, because there are a lot of links in the PowerPoint. When I pull a quote, I try to put the document that it came from in case you'd like to look at it further. Okay, so here's a quick overview of South Carolina MTSS. As we said, it's a framework and it's a system. We can think of systems like our body as a system. We can think of systems like I saw someone last week use the analogy of a bicycle. You know, their first thing looked like a layout of an IKEA or Legos, like you had all the pieces, and that's great, but it's not actually going to function. That bicycle's not going to function unless you put it together and all those pieces are working in tandem to make the bicycle, make the wheels turn, make you get from point A to point B. So when we think about the system of MTSS and how we want all of these parts and pieces to work together, it's important to know all of the parts. A lot of people hear multi-tiered system of supports, and they think of the 3-tiered intervention model. They think of tiers 1, 2, and 3. And that's a very important part of it, but it is just one part of MTSS. It's also important that schools have strong leadership teams, and there's no sequence to these. You don't have to understand one prior to the other, but you've got to have strong leadership. You've got to have systems in place for the capacity and the infrastructure. And we'll talk about each of these pieces throughout the session today, so I won't go deep into them right now. But just as a plant needs water, soil, sunlight, space, all of those things are needed. In MTSS, you need all of these parts that you see here on the screen today. So why do we need MTSS in South Carolina? There are 2 legislative mandates, and the focus is to improve student outcomes. That's our goal for everything we do in the K-12 system, is to improve our student outcomes. We have 2 laws. So Act 213 of 2018 requires local education agencies to screen kindergarten first and the option of 2nd grade students who may be at risk of academic difficulties. And then there's the Read to Succeed Act, which was amended in 2024 by Act 114. And that addresses what interventions and supports need to be provided to make sure students have strong academic outcomes. So this is the legal reason why, and these are just a few provisions again of Act 213 of 2018. You may have also heard it called the dyslexia law, but that particular law requires universal screening, tiered interventions, a solid database decision-making model, which we will go, that image is here, and we're going to talk through that. And then professional development has to be provided by the State Department of Education to schools and districts in MTSS. And I've linked at the bottom there, Act 213 of 2018, so you can find that legislation as well if you need that. And then the Read to Succeed law, again, that was of 2014, but it was amended in 2024, and there were some pretty significant changes. I've only pulled out the ones here that are related to MTSS, but if you want to look at all of the changes in the law, it is linked at the bottom of the screen as well. But this law also calls for the universal reading screenings and the individualized reading plans, which is a new component for the summer reading camp, and targeted literacy support. So the two laws work together. I think I may have skipped a slide, but what I wanted, oh no, I know what I did. I wanted to say to you here. So again, the point of these two laws was to make sure that we improve student outcomes in South Carolina. So I wanted us to take a minute to look at what the current outcomes in South Carolina are. The KRA is an assessment given in the fall to all kindergarten students. And you can see that statewide, 40.8% of kindergartners are coming into school ready to learn. We know we have gaps in education. We have gaps that, the middle school teachers will tell you some children come in, they can't read, but those gaps are starting from the minute children walk in the door. They're coming in with gaps. So it's not an excuse, but it is something to be aware of, that we have to differentiate the instruction to make sure we're meeting the needs of all of our students. And some of these things are social. You can think about if a student was in a daycare, they've kind of already got some of the social, sharing toys and so forth, where if they might be an only child and they were staying at home with grandma, there are a lot of benefits to that, but there are also, they haven't had those social experiences necessarily to share with other children. So there are things like that to consider. I also wanted us to take a look here at the South Carolina Ready ELA. We are looking at the students that would be meets or exceeds. That means they are at or above grade level. As of our last grades that were released, we have 54.1% of our students at or above grade level in ELA. So that's about a 50-50 chance that you're going to come out reading on grade level. That's not okay. That's way too low. And these are our end of course assessments for English 2. To be considered at or above grade level, it will be a C or higher. So currently 66.4% of our students are at or above grade level based on English 2 EOC. In math, again, to be on or above grade level will be meets or exceeds. We have 42.7 at or above grade level. So math is another story. I know we're here today to talk about our Read to Succeed, but I wanted you to see that as well. Math is actually even lower. There's a big need there. And our EOC for Algebra 1 is showing about the same. It's 47.8% at or above grade level. And unfortunately, we've seen some schools, some middle schools and such, that have 0% of their students at or above grade level in like the 8th grade. So we have a lot of work to do here in South Carolina. We also are looking at our on-time graduation rate. When you look at this, you see that 85.4% of our students are graduating on time, but that number can be deceiving because if you look at a breakdown, that story is not true for everyone, and we have many subgroups within our student population here in South Carolina. So you can see our lowest down there is our foster children. Only 43.9% of the foster children are graduating on time. And that is, so it's not really accurate to say 85% and think that that is true for everyone. We want to make sure we are meeting the needs of all students, and that's the purpose of MTSS. Some changes that we've made here at the State Department to support ELA based on the data that we've just seen. Act 114, as I said, was passed in 2024, which made significant changes to the way reading is taught in the state. It is a focus on scientifically based reading instruction. And again, people sometimes hear one thing and they think that means phonics. A lot of people have connected that with phonics. Phonics is a part of it, but it is not just phonics. It is all reading. And so we're not going to go deep into that today, but you will see that in the competencies as well. updated academic standards. The standards are aligned with Act 114. We had a new textbook adoption that is also aligned with Act 114. The literacy competencies have been updated and they are aligned. We have literacy specialists. We have 22 literacy specialists which work in our school districts across the state, and they support the reading coaches. And so reading coaches were enacted based on the Read to Succeed Act in 2014. And so the literacy specialists go out and support those reading coaches. And then we have LETRS professional development, which was given. I know some EPPs had the opportunity to join in that as well, but we did have that for all K-3 teachers in the state. And then we are currently setting up to offer that to 4th and 5th grade and middle school SPED as well. And that is professional development. In math, the academic standards have been updated as well. Textbook adoption is in process right now. They just finished their caravan. Palmetto Math Project last summer, a lead for that team was hired, as well as 5 math specialists. Before that, there were none. And they are currently in the process of hiring 17 additional math specialists. So there will be 22 math specialists, just as there are 22 reading specialists. So the goal is to work with upper elementary and middle schools to improve the math scores as well. And since the standards are new, there's a lot of professional development being offered from the Office of Assessment and Standards at the State Department. So those can be found online. Our superintendent has set a North Star goal for all of our districts to have student achievement reach 75% with the academics, all students at or above grade level by 2030. So we saw where the numbers were. So that is a big ask. So when I meet with districts and schools, the first thing I ask them is, do you think that goal is attainable? We all know how to write SMART goals. So based on where you are, which is different for all districts, do you think 75 is attainable? And we usually get a lot of crickets in the room. A lot of people think that's a high bar. So we go through this activity. This is an example of 3rd grade ELA. So we look at the South Carolina state report card, and 45.2 is is our baseline that we're looking at for where 3rd graders were in 2018 on SC Ready. And then we've got that 2030 goal of 75%. So I've worked through this with a lot of districts and have them figure out their goal line and how much growth they would need per year to meet that goal. And then we go back and we actually figure what did they make 2018, 2019, we skipped 2020, 2021, 22, 23, and 24, and they plot where they actually did score. So that way they can see if they are trending towards making that 75% at or above goal by 2030. I'm not going to go through that activity with y'all, but I wanted you to see it so you can see this is one thing we're doing with schools, because a big part of MTSS is understanding where you are and where you want to be and goal setting. So we want, our ultimate goal is for student outcomes to improve. So this is a separate day. We didn't need to go through this activity today, but I wanted you to have access to it in case it's something you'd like to look into further. Then I have districts go back and look and say which you might have had one year that was really high, one year that really kind of fell low, to really reflect on why that may have been. And it's important to understand and be reflected. So one district said, oh, I know that year we didn't have a 3rd grade teacher. We had a long-term sub. Another said, oh, well, that year we were doing hands-on with our math instruction. We weren't. Now the teachers seem to be going through worksheets and going through a workbook cover to cover. And back then we had more hands-on. So they could actually name what was working and what wasn't working. So that's another important part of trying to problem solve. So now here's what you came to hear. Why should EPPs understand MTSS? So first of all, it's coming from part of the Read to Succeed Act, which is Act 114, amended by Act 114. All pre-service South Carolina teacher prep programs must ensure that their teacher candidates possess the knowledge and skills to help students become proficient readers. Because as you can see, we have deficits right now in our reading scores across the state. So I've got the two paragraphs pulled here. The first one is about early childhood, elementary, special ed, and the second one is about middle or secondary. And they're basically the same. We've just got, well, they're not, I'm sorry. I pulled out there. So you've got to have 12-hour course sequence for the major components, and it's got to be aligned with the South Carolina literacy competencies for pre-K through fifth. And then middle and high, or middle and secondary, you've got to have 6 hours, a 6-hour sequence in literacy, and it has to be aligned with the literacy competencies for middle and high. So, which competencies are important for what you're going to be doing here? In full transparency, all of the competencies are relevant to MTSS, because as you're going to see as we go through the components of MTSS, everything that schools and districts do falls into the category of MTSS. MTSS is the whole system and how everything works together. But these are 3 indicators that are specifically naming MTSS. So I pulled these out. And this indicator 1-3, it's 1-3 in the elementary or the K-5 competencies, and it's also 1-3 in the middle and secondary competencies. So that's
You're buying stuff?
I'm sorry? Oh, I think if you make sure your mic is muted, please. So the indicators are the same, but then the competencies below the indicators are specific. So that will, and you can go to the link at the bottom there, the South Carolina literacy competencies, and see the specific competencies below each indicator. But teachers are to understand the role of scientific research, comprehensive data, progress monitoring, and professional judgment in ensuring that the reading development and achievement occurs for all students. They also are to demonstrate an understanding of MTSS, including the types of instruction that should occur in Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 to support the needs of all learners, including students with disabilities, multilingual learners, and immigrant students. And also demonstrate an understanding of student performance on screening, progress monitoring, diagnostic, and summative assessment tools. We've already kind of gone over this, but I wanted you to just see again the 6 components. We're about to go through each of these components one by one. The first thing we ask districts to do, and if you see a page number on the bottom corner of your screen, that is where you can find this information in the MTSS framework and guidance document. So this little guideline is for districts to, if they don't know where to start. The SAM is an instrument that was created in Florida, and this is a self-assessment. So it is basically you're looking at all 6 components and you're discussing whether you think your school is on target. Like, we have a good leadership team. We have our data meetings weekly. They kind of score themselves to determine where their areas of need are for improvement. So I asked them to do that first. That is not something that they have to turn in, but it is something that will guide them. It's self-assessment. And then develop an action plan for which areas they're going to work on, make adjustments and refinements as needed, and then go back and do the SAM at the end of the year to see the growth. And this is for their implementation of MTSS. And again, the point is that we are making all of these components work together. So leadership fully understands and supports what's going on in the classroom, their infrastructure. They've made sure all of their parts and pieces are working together. So items 1 through 5 of the SAM refer to leadership, and this is where schools and school leadership teams and district leadership teams have to establish procedures and decision rules for problem solving at their school, grade, and individual student level, and make sure that the materials and resources are in place for that core instruction and for intervention. These are the recommended teams, district leadership teams, school leadership teams, grade level or department teams. Sometimes you might have a grade level that's one teacher. And so we want to make sure that they have someone to collaborate with. So it might be primary, elementary grades work together. In high school, it might be that all of your science department is working together, etc. And the problem solving team is going to be when you get down to an individual student, that you have a team to come together and discuss the best way to support that student. These are, and this is on page 106 in the MTSS framework and guidance document. These are recommendations for leadership teams in schools and districts. This is not a must-have. You don't have to have these people on your teams, but a lot of people need some ideas for getting started. So we want to make sure, one thing you might notice on the problem-solving team on the far right, you want to make sure everyone who has interaction with that particular student has a voice at the table. You might have a child who performs really well or really gets along with their peers and really is engaged in PE or art or music, but they are struggling in a classroom. You want to make sure it's not a personality glitch between a teacher and a student. You want to make sure you're looking at the whole child and you're seeing how they behave in all settings. I had a student once that would always get in trouble on the bus, and he was just a perfect little angel in my class, and I couldn't figure out why he was getting written up on the bus every day. And then we discovered that when he got on the bus and he was with his brother, it was more of a survival mode because home was a little rough. And so he was trying to be tough and getting in trouble. So you've got to investigate and try to figure out how to help that child be the best that they can in all settings. So you've got to know and you've got to understand all aspects of that student. Some other things that are very important for leadership teams to think of when they're planning is when are they going to meet, having an agenda, like some sort of a recording form. It doesn't have to be any of these. These are just ideas that were put in for them to choose from. And then that you are going to have a plan for how to analyze data. It's very ineffective if you tell all of your grade level teachers to meet every Tuesday for an hour and a half, but they don't know, they don't have any kind of a protocol in place for how to look at data. We don't want these to be meetings to plan the homecoming float. We want these to be meetings to bring writing samples, and you're going to go through them and you're going to talk about the growth over time. And so there are some protocols out there. Of course, they can create a protocol, but if not, here are some examples to go by. We want to make sure that our time is well spent. These are just some options for data sources, and also it's important to make sure that there is professional development available for every level of implementation. Again, it's important for leadership. They make a lot of decisions with allocating funding. So they need to be very aware of the data and making sure that those purchases are aligned with what is needed in the classroom based on the data of their population. The next component is capacity and infrastructure for implementation. Those are items 6 through 16 on the SAM. It is very important that schools have a clear model of coaching to support classroom teachers. The Read to Succeed Act was very clear about coaching. Coaches are partially funded from the State Department and partially funded by the school districts, but they are not to be in classrooms full-time. They are there to support teachers. So there's a memorandum of agreement that is signed to make sure they're not covering a class for long periods of time. They're not in charge of the MAP. I don't know if we have computer labs anymore now. I was about to say the MAP lab, but almost everyone's one-on-one now, but they're not supposed to be spending all of their time doing that kind of logistical work. They're supposed to be providing professional development in classrooms, modeling for teachers, et cetera. So it's important to make sure that there's a clear model of coaching to support classroom teachers, and our state literacy specialists go into schools and help coaches with that. There also has to be a very thoughtful and intentional schedule, not only for the importance of making sure you're making the most of all instructional time, but also that you have provided time for job-embedded collaboration, database problem solving, and decision making. So those teams that we just looked at, you want to make sure there's a time for those teams to meet in your schedule, and then also map resources and figure out what you have for interventions, et cetera, and where there may be some gaps in what you need. So here are some tools. The South Carolina Literacy Specialists offer regional support currently for reading coaches around the state. So they've got a coaching model, and we are currently going through collaborative coaching training as all the coaches in the Office of Instructional Supports. So that is going to be the focus to make sure that's a very reflective model where you're really trying to work with the people that you're working with. You're really trying to make them think through exactly what it is they're doing and why they're doing it, and build that capacity in the coaches. And then hopefully that will turn around and be done with the teachers as well. Scheduling, this is a scheduling checklist. This is more for secondary schools. And this is provided from Hanover Research, but it's important to make sure that students are spending more time in subjects in which they're struggling. That's one of the bullets. And maximizing instructional time, the next to the bottom bullet down there, is to make sure they're spending time in subjects in which they're struggling. So you've got to know what they're struggling in. You've got to have that specific data for the individual students in order to meet that requirement. This is an activity that we do with most districts that we meet with. We have them, they get a blank one of these charts. We've got one here. But this just has some examples in it for them. But we have them really think through, what is your core program? What are you using to teach reading, for example, in Tier 1? And I've linked it to the core programs that have been approved in the state of South Carolina. That link will take you there. And then what are some evidence-based interventions that are being used for your Tier 2 students? So if districts say one particular program is Read 180, a lot of schools in the state use that program. But if all students are doing Read 180 every day for 30 minutes, then it is not a Tier 2 intervention. If everyone is getting it, then it is considered Tier 1. So Tier 1 is your core and what you do for all students. So they need to think through, if they want to have those students do an extra 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week, that could be considered Tier 2 because you are increasing or intensifying that level of support. A lot of the curriculums that have been approved have different items worked in that are for intervention. So they could find intervention activities within their core program. Also, one of the assessments used in the state is iReady, and iReady has a lot of resources that come with it. So there may be something like that they're using above and beyond for Tier 2. There are many other programs. It doesn't necessarily have to be a program that they purchase, but it needs to be evidence-based interventions, and it needs to be targeted, matched on where they are struggling. And that's why we have that screening as well, to know where they're struggling specifically. They need to think through the resources that are available and the routines that they have in place. What assessments are used for Tier 1? For example, you might be using an instruction that comes with your curriculum. All students will be taking the interim assessments or the benchmark assessments, which are MAP, STAR, iReady. There are several, and they're listed there. I've linked to that website so you can see which ones are the approved. That's for Tier 1. Every student takes that. And then the progress monitoring tools, those are specific in different districts that can, again, iReady, a lot of those different screening tools will come with progress monitoring tools. So schools can use those, but they need to think through that and know what they're going to be using. It doesn't need to be that they're struggling to find those resources every time they need to intensify instruction for students with Tier 2 or Tier 3. What PD is being offered in each of those areas, and then what procedures or protocols. We know Tier 1, everybody gets a report card. There may be newsletters, but they need to also think through the procedures for how they're going to keep parents informed for Tier 2 and Tier 3. Also, procedures and protocols of how you may move a child from Tier 1 to Tier 2 or Tier 2 to Tier 3 or back into Tier 1. Those are not meant to be stagnant placements. Again, building capacity, you want to always make sure that teachers are receiving the professional development needed. So these are just some options of PD that are being offered through the state of South Carolina currently. We also have resources available through South Carolina Teams. These are technical assistance centers that partner with the Office of Special Education here at State Department. And so but they also offer many resources that are for general ed as well. Communication and collaboration is another thing that that districts and schools must consider and have a plan for. How are they going to communicate internally and externally? So how do teachers understand, for example, when they do the progress monitoring, which is checking to see if the interventions that they have done are working, how do they turn that in for their school leadership team? Like if they're going to be monitoring if what they're doing is working, is there some sort of a protocol for when those scores are recorded, where they're recorded? They need to have that communication so teachers all understand what to do. They also need to make sure they are informing others in the other stakeholders. So here's an example from Swift Educational Center. And so this is just, again, an example, but you could list all of the people that would need to know what's happening in your school. Why is it important that they understand what is happening in your school? How are you going to communicate with them? Who's responsible for that? And how often will we meet with them? So, for example, the school board of education. Why is it important for them to understand student progress and student outcomes in your school? They make a lot of decisions. They make a lot of hiring decisions. They make a lot of decisions about the funding for resources, et cetera. So it's important that they are kept abreast of what's going on. So that might be at monthly board meetings. And how are you going to communicate that? Is it going to be that someone goes and speaks? Most likely a principal or a representative from the district would go and speak. So just having that laid out so that you know and nothing important gets overlooked. And here's one of our key components of MTSS, the three-tiered instructional intervention model. And this is the items 29 through 35 of the SAM. As I mentioned before, Tier 1 practices are for everyone. Core instructional and universal behavior expectations, et cetera. So that should meet the needs of 80% of the student population. And so they would know that by looking at their universal screening. If 80% are performing and not at risk, performing well and not at risk, then the things that they're doing for all students are working. We have a lot of districts who are being told that their triangle is inverted. They have too many, they have more students needing interventions. That is a clear indicator that what's being done in Tier 1 is not effective. So you need to go back and look at your core instruction, your curriculum, and also how it's being taught and what's being done. So then you've also got to ensure that Tier 2 and Tier 3 are evidence-based and focused on targeted skills and based on student data. And the progress monitoring is critical because you need to make sure that what you're doing and what you're spending your time on with those interventions is actually effective. Here's a look at the three-tiered instruction intervention model. You can just visually see here that Tier 1 is for most of your students, should be at least about 80%. Tier 2 is going to be targeted support. Tier 2 is typically students who are about a year behind grade level. Tier 3 would typically be students who are 2 or more years behind grade level. You want to make sure that your teachers that are providing this support are well-trained staff. You want to make sure you're giving students enough support. But again, you can see we've got more children in that Tier 1. That's everybody. So when you think of MTSS, your focus should not be on Tier 2 and Tier 3. Your focus should be on Tier 1. What you're doing for everyone is critical. They're all important, but Tier 1 is your prevention. That is what you want to prevent anyone from needing that Tier 2 and Tier 3 because you're meeting their needs in Tier 1 and Tier 1. So again, this is another way of looking at it. It's the same thing. MTSS is a framework for instruction that focuses on prevention and intervention. All students are receiving Tier 1, And then if they're struggling in a certain area of tier one, then you pull them out to do targeted instruction to try to close that gap. There could be many reasons for that gap. And then that is to be in addition to tier one. They're not to be pulled out of the core instruction because you don't want to cause more gaps. So this is just another way to look at the tiers. We talked about the importance of leadership teams making communication clear for their teachers. This is an example from Broward County Schools out of Florida. They had some charts like this. Typically, you think of your stoplight colors. Typically, tier one is associated with green, tier two is associated with yellow, and tier three is associated with red. So this just kind of is an at a glance of what districts, and these are district decisions. This is not a set in stone decision of what should be in these boxes. But typically, group size, all students are tier one. That instruction occurs daily for ELA. 90 to 100 minutes. Now, I tell districts they have to look at their district direction on time, on duration, because that is a local decision. And then progress monitoring would occur 3 times a year. It's typically fall, winter, spring that they're given screeners. So that would be the classroom teacher doing that. It's in the general ed classroom, et cetera. So this just kind of shows what you were doing for all students in the green. When you pull out students for tier two intervention, and again, I keep saying you pull them out. This could be in the classroom. This could be integrated into the classroom, but it would be 2 to 3 times a week. And again, this would be a district decision of how often they do this, but they need consistency. It would be in addition to tier one. You might say it's going to be 15 to 30 minutes a day, 2 to 3 times a week. And then you determine what your progress monitoring tools would be, et cetera. So this type of setup just kind of helps make sure everyone's on the same page and you've really thought through your protocols and procedures for how you will provide interventions. Some important considerations with MTSS and special ed. This is coming from a document that was put out from special ed called the SEED document, which is linked there at the bottom. Federal and state regulations are clear. That a child must not be determined to be a child with a disability if it's due to a lack of appropriate instruction in reading. So it is very important that schools and districts are documenting and keeping a record of what they are doing in tier one, what they are doing in tier two, what they are doing in tier three. Because if you don't have evidence, if it's a matter of attendance and a child has missed so much school, special ed department may say we can't test this student because we don't know that they've been instructed because they haven't been in school. It's pretty cut and dry on whether a child was in school or not in school. We keep very clear attendance records. The records need to also be clear on what was taught in those classrooms. That's why something like this would be very helpful. You can see what's being delivered and how it's being assessed for every child. And that could be done by grade level. All schools might not be using the same thing in every grade level, but it should be pretty clear. The same goes for math and English proficiency. And then it goes further to define exactly what that should look like. There needs to be evidence of the core curriculum and supplemental materials. We want to make sure that they are evidence-based materials, they're using the right kind of materials, that the teachers that are teaching are qualified, and that there is documentation of other factors such as frequent absences, et cetera. So it goes through and breaks that down again for math and for English learners. So you want to make sure that you are documenting what is occurring in your school. Database problem solving. This is a big one as well. We need to make sure that when it gets down to that team, and that team is looking at a student's performance, that they are looking at the whole child, that they are looking at what's going on in the child's life outside of school as much as they can, that they are looking at multiple considerations to make sure they understand what's going on before they make decisions. One thing that is very familiar image that we've seen before is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Schools have to problem solve to determine how to support that child and make sure that basic needs are being met. We have a big population of homeless students in our state and all over our country, and I'm sure that's growing. And we need to make sure that that is not going to be a barrier for students. We want all students to be successful, and we don't want fees or fines or tardies or absences to be preventing those students from doing the best that they can. We need to step in as much as we can to support. So when those teams are looking at a student, they need to consider everything, the full picture. It's also important to understand that multilingual services are not considered interventions. They are considered tier 1 instruction. So basically, when you think of tier 1, within tier 1, there is differentiation. So with that, everyone has the same goal. They have the same grade level standards. They have the same target that they're trying to achieve. But you can accomplish that in different ways. You may have to have supports that you give those students to help them reach that goal. And that is where MLs fall. They're going to need additional supports called accommodations. So this is just typically what you would have to do to help them reach that goal. Think of GPS. We're all headed to Sullivan's Island for the day to spend a day on the beach. There are many routes we can take to get there, but we all want to end up at the same place. So we want all of our students to meet the grade level standards, but some might need more than others to get there. That is considered differentiating the instruction to help them reach that goal. If they go into tier 2, they've got a more targeted, there may be a gap, maybe they're struggling with fluency. So they've got some targeted lessons to support fluency, and they've got a progress monitoring tool on fluency. So that is a specific targeted separate goal. But when we're trying to meet our general grade level goals, differentiation is how we do different things to help those students all get to that same location. So ML should be considered the same as any other student eligible for any program that will help them reach the standard of performance. So they can receive intensified instruction through tiers 2 or tier 3. But again, we don't want people to confuse just trying to give them that extra accommodation as being intervention. And this just kind of goes over and explains what accommodations are and what they are not. And this is pulled from the Title III Multilingual Learner and Immigrant Student Program Guide. Special ed. Another important point from special education is that MTSS or RTI may not be used to delay or deny a full and individual evaluation. So if you suspect that a child has a disability as you're going through the process, you can refer them for an evaluation. And again, what we saw earlier, if you refer them for evaluation and you don't have any evidence that they've been taught properly with evidence-based instruction, they might say we can't evaluate because we don't have any proof that you've actually taught them what they need to learn. But you can't say we're not going to evaluate because you've got to go through 8 more weeks of intervention before we can evaluate, because then you're withholding supports that student may qualify for with special education. So that is coming from a memo out of the Office of Special Education. And this is another quote that says basically the same thing, but this is coming from their SEED document. Now, we don't want to, this is not encouraging people to skip interventions and go straight to evaluation. This would be an extreme circumstance where the team would really suspect a disability, which it's not your MTSS teams. It's not their decision to decide if the child needs it, but if they suspect a disability, they need to reach out to their special ed department and let them guide the path forward. 4-step problem-solving model. This is the model that's recommended from the State Department, that it's 4 steps. We define what the problem is, we analyze why it's occurring, and then we try to make a change. We implement something. What are we going to do about it? And then we evaluate, is what we're doing, is it working? So that looks very simple, and that's what we want it to be. We want it to be very simple, 4 steps. We do have some guidance from Judy Elliott, who was a national guru in MTSS. We're very fortunate to have had her support here in our state. Step 1, she's broken it down to have some questions to guide school teams. Identify your concerns. So if we were looking at it from the state perspective, we had roughly 54% of our students reading on grade level. That's a concern. So using that data, what is the current level of performance? 54%. What is the benchmark level? We've got 75 set by the state that we want 75% on or above grade level. A lot of the research that we've seen is that 80% of your students should be at or above grade level if you have strong core instruction. So you can use one of those numbers to determine your gap. And you can look and see, well, how are other states doing, or how are other, I guess that would be the best comparison to see your peer performance. If it was a school district, you could look at other school districts similar to yours to see how many of their students are at or above grade level. When you look at the South Carolina State Report Card online, you can see all districts. That's public information. So this would be step 1, and then you would set a goal. So this is our problem, and this is how we want to fix it. This is what we want to reach. The step 2 would be the problem analysis. Why is this goal not occurring? So in this phase, Dr. Elliott advised us to use a tool called the ISIL Riot Matrix, which I've got on the next slide here, but it is going to be to make a hypothesis of why you think our situation is what it is and what we're going to do about it. So the 4-step problem solving model here, again, step 2, the problem analysis. We're going to look at ISIL. Here on the left side, the key domains of learning would be instruction, which is how you're teaching the curriculum, which is what you're teaching, the environment, what things are like in that school, your whole culture in your school, and then the learner. A lot of times, I know this doesn't happen in higher ed, but a lot of times in K-12 education, you might hear someone say, well, these students that I have this year, or this group of kids, and blah, blah, blah. Well, people jump to blaming the learner. The learner could be the issue, but that is not where we need to start. We are most likely going to find that the issue is in one of the top 3 categories there: instruction, curriculum, environment, or the learner. So when you make that hypothesis of what you think the problem is, then you need to ask yourself, if the problem, for example, let's think of instruction. So Act 114 has shifted the way we teach reading to scientifically based or evidence-based instruction. We had a different way of teaching prior with our old standards, and there are many factors that cause data to be as it is, but the 54% is obviously showing that what we've been doing is not working. So we need to be teaching in a different way. And one of the main premises of scientific-based instruction would be the gradual release of responsibility. I do, we do, you do. You're explicitly showing students what they're expected to do. You're working together with them, and then you are turning it over for them to do. And I believe most people believe that philosophically, but when you walk into classrooms, sometimes you'll see the I do, you see teach, and then you see the you do. Now you go do it. And the we do is often rushed or overlooked. So it's important that we really look at the way we're teaching, and the riot on the other side would be how you go back and you actually determine if those things are happening. So if you want to know if your instruction is high quality or what's going on with instruction, you can either review and go back and look through, for example, lesson plans. You could interview key stakeholders. You could go have an interview with your teachers. You could observe. You could go into the classrooms and actually watch and see, or you could test through appropriate measures. So those are how you will determine if the issue is curriculum, instruction, curriculum, environment, or learner. Those are some ways that you actually go in. So I've got the ISIL Riot Matrix linked on this slide as well. It's a very helpful tool in the 4-step problem solving process. And then step 3 will be to make a plan. What are we going to do about it now that we know what our problem is? And step 4 would be to evaluate if you realize that you may need to adjust your goal to go higher. You may need to just start and do a brand new intervention because what you're doing is not being effective. So you want to evaluate if what you're doing in instruction or intervention is working. And again, you've got a lot of resources here. If you want a copy of this entire worksheet, it's linked at the bottom. Dr. Judy Elliott's 4-step problem solving worksheet. This is a continuation of the last. And so you might want to go back and see if there are other hypotheses to consider as to why you may be where you are. Data evaluation. School teams should look at items 36 to 42 of the SAM. So we've really got 2 main components here. We want to look and see if based on the different types of assessment that are being used, if the core instruction is working. And you also want to monitor your entire MTSS process and make sure that your system that's in place is working. So these are several types of assessments commonly used throughout MTSS, and each one has a different purpose. The universal screeners, as we mentioned at the beginning, those are required by law, and so those had to go through an approval process. That is linked here for you so you can see the SCDE approved screeners. And then the benchmark or interim assessments also had to go through an approval process. So the ones that can be used for that purpose by school districts are linked in that link there. And then diagnostic assessments would be to take it further and to really go in the tier 2 and tier 3 and see what some more specific needs might be with those students. Progress monitoring would be after you have tried a certain instruction or intervention practice to monitor and make sure that what you're doing is working, and you need multiple data points for that. And then your outcome assessments would be your summative. That's at the end. That would be something like your SC Ready as well, something like that. This is how another way that districts and schools can look at their implementation of MTSS overall. They really need to stop and look at their data and determine if their core program is working for most students. That's the biggest question they can ask. If what they're doing for the majority of their students is not working, it must change, and change is hard. And that we're very fortunate right now that the state standards, the curriculum, the professional development being offered, the courses that you're going to offer, all of these things are being shifted to work together and to do things the same way, because sometimes we have a lot of directions and we want to all be working in tandem to try to make sure we are meeting the needs of the students in South Carolina. So do the staff have the knowledge and skills? And so in your case also, do the students leaving your school, are they as prepared as they can possibly be to effectively use data and support students? And then what are some areas of strength and improvement for MTSS implementation? Another important thing to think about for tier 2, are we under or over identifying who needs that extra support? A lot of districts have confused differentiation in tier 1 and interventions for tier 2. They think that just shifting your instructional approach slightly is an intervention, and it's not. That is differentiation. As we said earlier, that's, again, you can tell I want to go to the beach really badly. So Sullivan's Island, if you want to go down to Isle of Palms or Sullivan's Island, that's going to be your end destination for tier 1 to meet those grade level standards. So trying to support students in every way possible to meet that standard is what you should be doing. That's differentiation. But if you've got a student who is in first grade and they missed big portions of their kindergarten because maybe they had a medical issue, there was some reason that they missed a lot of their core foundational skills, you might need to go back and have a series of several weeks of lessons to try to close that gap. And that would be a tier 2 intervention where you have some specific lessons that you're doing to try to fill a deficit so they can catch up and be with the class. You want tier 2 is really to help catch people up who are within a grade level behind of where they are. Tier 3, you've got some extensive interventions that need to be done. But we need to also consider, are we over-identifying? Is the problem that we didn't have the curriculum or the instruction or the environment in place? We don't want to over-identify students for interventions. We really want to make sure that tier 1 is strong. Just to kind of wrap it up here, districts and schools should continuously examine and refine their assessment, instruction, and intervention systems to demonstrate a steady increase in the number of students meeting or exceeding grade level expectations as determined by state assessments. Students must be able to transfer the knowledge and skills throughout the day to demonstrate true proficiency across all content areas and contexts, and that's coming from the framework and guidance document. And if you would, I'm going to stop and ask you some questions, but you can also complete this survey. I would appreciate it. So do we have any questions?
Charlene, we did receive one and I responded to that. The
Perfect.
question was, can we get the PowerPoint?
Yes.
And the PowerPoint and the recording of this presentation will go out next week. The reason why next week is because with any sort of recording that we do, we send it off so that way it can be closed captioned. And so
Yes.
that takes a few days usually because it's done in another office. So I will have that out to all EPPs, all contacts next week for everyone.
Perfect. Any other questions about MTSS?
Hey, I don't have a question, Brooke, but I just want to say thanks. This is really, really helpful, especially from a methods course standpoint, and then just also as honestly as a former elementary and middle grades teacher and a current third grade parent.
Yes.
This is really, really eye-opening and
Great.
and just yeah. I'm super, this has been the best hour I've spent in probably 2 months. So
Oh,
thanks.
bless you. Thank you. I'm so glad. I'm so glad it was helpful. It really is everything. People think MTSS is some separate thing they've got to learn, but it's really just a collection of all you do and making sure that your different parts and pieces are working together to help students. So
Awesome. Thanks. And yeah, I'm interested in the PowerPoint, especially for coursework. I think
Right.
it would really help our students to be able to see some of these models, and to be able to think about that, especially even just being able to talk about things like this in job interviews. I would like to equip them to be able to have these kinds of conversations, as potential candidates.
And when you reference the MTSS framework and guidance document, if you go Google that document, unfortunately, the old version pops up and the new version. So also make sure you're using the 2024 version. We have removed it from the State Department website, but it's still out there on the web, the old one. So it's not drastically different, but we do want to make sure people are using the current version. And it has a lot of resources embedded. So
Hey, thank you.
thank you.
And I want to thank you for bringing up the difference between differentiation and intervention, because a lot of our students don't understand that difference. So it's important that they do have something that they can look at and know that there is a difference there and that they
Perfect.
need to understand that.
Yes, and a lot of teachers have that misunderstanding as well in the classroom. So it's definitely something that needs to be discussed and really thought through, because there are things that, as long as there have been teachers, you've tried to do whatever you can to help that student understand what you're teaching. And that's, differentiation. You're going to present things in a different way. And that's not the same process of going through and having a set of lessons for an intervention and having that progress monitoring. So yes, very important point.
Charlene, one question popped into chat. Here
Yes.
it is. Has there been any conversation concerning chronic absenteeism? Because even if there is a strong MTSS system, students will not benefit unless they are in school.
There is a section in the MTSS document on attendance. That is definitely very important. And, we think about our circle of control. Sometimes there are things that are external, especially when you get into the high school. Someone may be working, they may be caring for siblings. That's why you've got to know the whole child. You've got to know the circumstances and see if there are more supports you can give them. It might not be an academic intervention. It may be that you are trying to help. I heard someone mention the other day that, they had one child that they knew had to come in and sleep in the nurse's office for 1 hour before they started their day. I mean, that's not going to be your typical thing that you do, but when life circumstances are hard, you don't want it to be a dropout. You want to help that child in every way you can. So, Aveen Coleman at the State Department of Education, she has a lot of information on attendance, and she works with school districts on attendance. So I will tell you this as well, we are currently planning, we are a team of 2 for MTSS at the State Department, by the way. But we are planning to make a series of online modules to really take all of these different components and break them down and dig deeper and have those online that people can do self-studies and watch those, because we can't get around to all districts in the state. Right now, we're doing some monthly online PD with districts, but we want to have the resources out there for anyone to pull the areas they need support in. So we'll make sure we focus one on attendance, but there is a section in the MTSS document about attendance. There are some cases where the students are not coming because the climate in the school is uncomfortable. So you want to make sure that was one piece on the ISIL riot matrix, the environment. You want to make sure it's a place people want to be. So there are things that the school can do to make sure attendance issues are not the school's fault. You want to do all you can to make sure that the child feels comfortable coming to school, that they're not being bullied, that there are things in place and there are behavioral considerations to make that child feel that they have, mentor programs are one thing that a lot of districts and schools do, so that every child has at least one strong relationship with an adult in the school. So attendance is certainly an issue, but considering ways to mitigate that, and there are interventions for attendance linked as well in the document. So you do want to do all you can to support students with that as well. So your interventions might not be academic, they might be on something like attendance. Any other questions? Well, thank y'all so much. And the next slide, which I took it out of share mode, but the next slide has I'm sorry, I'm going to fix it's not OELL anymore. We're OIS, the Office of Instructional Supports. But these are the contact. This is the contact information. Our director is Dr. Alicia Green. And then we've got the team lead for Read to Succeed, Marie Gibbons, and then I'm the team lead for MTSS. Dr. Tammy Graham is the team lead for Early Learning, and the newly hired last summer, Elizabeth Schumpert, is our team lead for Palmetto Math. We need that as well, even though that's not your focus here today. I know you have colleagues that are working with math, and we are trying to really attack that as well, because we can see from our test scores that we have some major needs in math. So thank y'all all so much.
Charlene, from Jackie and I, thank you so much for being here. Folks from our EPPs, we thank you for being here. I'll stay on if you have any questions. We very much appreciate your time, and the recording will be sent out next week. Everyone have a great Thursday. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Charlene, I'm looking back at my notes. Can I ask a clarifying question?
Certainly.